Welcome back, everyone. Happy Sunday to you all. This is Kingsway Christian School, ready for Unit 5. I'm still Mark McCall, just like yesterday. I'm your facilitator and timer. If it's okay with you, we'll stick with the green background for the 1-minute warning and the yellow background for your 4-minute and 8-minute time's up notice. And other than that, I'm going to mute myself so that I can enjoy what it is you have to share and hand you over to the judges.
Well, welcome back. We're so glad you're here, and we're glad to be here as well. I'm Rebecca Tinder, retired attorney from Charleston, West Virginia. I'm the West Virginia We the People coordinator.
I'm Lindsay Draper, currently Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion of the Institute for Wellbeing in Law.
And I'm Candida Steele, and I'm still retired from the U.S. Civilian Board of Contract Appeals. Welcome back. Good to see you all again.
And you are?
I'm Macy Castetter, and we are Unit 5.
I'm Anna Strege.
I'm Micah Miller.
I'm Noah Cooper.
I'm Joseph Midla, and this is our teacher, Mrs. Nolan.
Great.
Welcome.
Well, it will come as no surprise to you that we are doing question 2. Political and social movements in American history have been successful because of the right of assembly. President Abraham Lincoln wrote in a letter that, quote, the right of peaceable assembly, end quote, is part of the, quote, constitutional substitute for revolution, end quote. Do you agree or disagree with President Lincoln? Why? What is the history of freedom of assembly in America? What historical or contemporary evidence is there, if any, that political and social movements have led to significant changes in laws or policies? What limits, if any, should be placed on the right to freedom of assembly? You may begin.
Unanimously agree with President Lincoln that the right to peaceably assemble is a better solution than a revolution. When in a revolution, corruption can evolve and evil can become rooted in the society. While the right to assemble can get out of hand, revolutions have much greater impacts. Revolutions can lead to war and can also lead other countries to destruction. Peaceful assembly can bring about revolutions, but if the peace can remain, it is most likely won't start conflict. However, peaceful assemblies bring about a revolution because those who are standing up for what they believe in becomes overpowering. If they feel as if no one is listening, with enough power, they could potentially overthrow the government of their hopes of a system that could better listen.
The history of freedom of assembly in America dates back all the way to our founding fathers. In pre-colonial American history, the English monarchy was fearful that if freedom of assembly was allowed, those who participated would overthrow the government. Quaker William Penn was pronounced guilty for public preaching while he was in England. The case against him included gatherings of unlawful assemblies in public. Penn was found innocent, but he had found out the British had the right to assemble. Although during the Revolutionary War, the British Army attempted to restrict those who peacefully protested the taxes that the Parliament passed. So the advocates of American liberty began to realize that freedom of assembly was dominant for those who saw problems with their community and wanted to make a change. If the people could not assemble, they could not achieve their goal. During the Civil Rights Movement, the idea that such citizens of every race and color shall have the same right as is enjoyed by white citizens was later affirmed by the 14th Amendment. The Act of 1866 also overrides the Supreme Court ruling in the Dred Scott versus Stanford case, which contained the idea that if you weren't white and were not a citizen, you did not have the right to sue in American courts. This leads to the evidence that currently, no matter someone's race, they have the right to sue in court. After the Civil War, with the protection of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act of 1866, African Americans enjoyed a period when they were allowed to vote, actively participate in political processes, acquire the land of former owners, seek their own employment, and use public accommodations. Some assemblies were peaceful and others ended in violence.
Each assembly was to support the protest of something or to make a point. One instance when this occurred was when Martin Luther King Jr. began the civil rights movement, supporting the idea that all men and women of all races are equal. An example of a peaceful protest was the Montgomery bus boycott. This protest was significant because in 1955, the bus riders in Alabama were segregated by race. African Americans were required to give up their seat if a white person had nowhere to sit. The unfairness of this situation caused outrage. With any conflict, however, indignation occurs. Nevertheless, on December 1st, 1955, the protests began. The day after, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. suggested a citywide boycott of public transportation at a church meeting, which lasted 381 days. This was very effective, causing the transit system to have a shortage of money. Large crowds of people took a stand and marched composedly to stop the segregation on buses. This example is one of many peaceful protests in America.
The limits that should be placed on freedom of assembly are ones that maintain peace within the gathering. Freedom of peaceful assembly is guaranteed by the First Amendment, but it must remain peaceful in order for it to continue. Those who gather for a certain cause want to have independence without the government interrupting. This is perfectly fine to do independently without the government interference. However, when taking advantage of this right and completely abusing your freedom, the government has no other choice than to prevent damage. One act of taking assembly are riots, which in some cases should be limited. Many riots have been experienced throughout time, whether it was the Capitol riots, the riots of Black Lives Matter, or even going back to 1992 with the LA riots. While each of these riots were for an important cause, some people took advantage of that freedom and began to abuse it by bringing in physical threats. These threats caused damage to the society and the people in it. Thank you for listening. We are now ready for follow-up questions.
Thank you. In DeYoung versus Oregon, the Supreme Court held that freedom of assembly was as important as freedom of speech. Do you believe that is true? And why or why not?
I believe this is true because our freedom of speech can be louder if we assemble together. So if we have a big assembly of people, our freedom of speech right gets stronger.
I agree with my fellow colleague because if we have the right to speak out our opinions and express ourselves, then we should also have the right to assemble with each other.
One of the more significant movements in our country was the women's suffrage movement. Can you talk to me a bit about how that involved freedom of assembly and the impact or the consequences of that movement?
I believe this showed freedom of assembly because the women that weren't being treated right because of the Inequality Act got together to make their voices heard, because usually when a whole group is unsatisfied with how they're being treated, they come together to make an impact and to make it stronger. And but I also believe that these assemblies have consequences because others will disagree because of clashing opinions.
Yeah, I agree, because when all of them got together, it made their voice louder, and I feel like more people started to listen rather than if just one or a couple stood up for that movement.
I believe the big thing about that was unity, and they all came together because they all believed for the same right and that they deserved something. So, yeah.
Can you tell us some examples of protests that were successful since the civil rights era? After all, that was 50 years ago now.
I think even going back to the Black Lives Matter protest, I think even though we still face inequality racially today and currently right now, I believe that still made an impact on how, even though we are of different skin colors, we should all be treated equal, because again, going back to that, when you assemble with others, it will make an impact because it shows the importance of it.
Okay.
Looking back at some court cases, what limits have the courts placed on assembly? And do you think those limits are justified or not? Explain. Do you think we're allowed to assemble anytime, anywhere, any place?
I think with coronavirus, we weren't allowed to assemble a lot because of the effect of the virus and that. So like in the malls, you couldn't be in a big group because of the danger of getting sick. So I think that was okay because it was to protect us.
Yeah, even without COVID, I still think parts of freedom of assembly are limited because I don't think you should just be able to go wherever you want, whenever you want, wherever you want, and it be okay.
So using your coronavirus example, can you think of anything that grew out of issues relating to coronavirus that would be cited or that could be cited as examples of using peaceful assembly as a message to the government?
Well, one instance where you could like assemble together just to like talk to your government about, like you could talk about how wearing masks doesn't, you can be in a group and assemble together and not wear your mask and prove to the government that it can or can't get you sick. Like that is one way where you can assemble together and protest against your government or like to your government if you just want to like share a message. Like if you are protesting against masks, you could like stand in a group for so many days and like say we're not getting sick together. Or even after you're vaccinated, you can say I've been sick after I've been vaccinated, and it like these aren't helping like our community or society.
And then with religion, like going to church and stuff, I think people thought it was more important to be with their community, like the church, rather than risking it to get sick. So I think they thought it was important to practice their beliefs rather than staying at home.
Okay,
You
thank
talked
you.
about, sorry, go on.
No,
Lindsay?
I just said thank you.
Oh, okay. You were talking about the 14th Amendment and the Dred Scott decision, and I think you said that the Dred Scott decision stood for a right to sue in court. Is that what you said? Do you know, do you have any other things that you can cull from the Dred Scott decision? What else is important about it to the country?
I think it showed that like the African American people were kind of treated wrongly because they weren't allowing him to sue the Americans because he wasn't a citizen. And I think that's more relevant now because it's really important that we can practice our freedom of speech if we're a citizen and we believe we need to sue someone for something they did. I think it's important that we should do that.
We've talked a lot about our rights that the First Amendment provides to us. Do we have any responsibilities when we're exercising the right to assemble? And if so, what are our responsibilities?
I believe we hold many responsibilities when it comes to assembling because, for example, if I believe if threat and physical harm comes along while in an assembly, it becomes unsafe for the people in the area around. And so I think that is our job and to keep everybody safe.
I agree with Macy because if we are trying to assemble or unite together, we need to take precautions with those around us and like ourselves to make sure nobody is in danger.
Not just go.
Okay, I agree and say that we should not hurt anyone's rights and we shouldn't break the law when we assemble.
Are there any issues that you believe right now in your life are worth you assembling, protesting, marching? Whether local, at school, nationwide, anything strike you as I need to have my voice heard?
The Asian hate crimes and stuff. I have 2 Asian brothers. I think it's important to make it known that their lives matter too. So I think it's important that you should.
I believe, especially when the students were quarantined, I believe it's important to be a voice for those and be aware of the mental health that's going on because staring at a computer all day and being locked inside, I think it's important to stand up and say, this isn't right, this isn't helping our mental health.
Thank you. Great job. Obviously, we wanted to keep talking to you. We had more questions, and I know you had more answers. Good job. I like that you started out with telling us that whether you agreed or disagreed, and then you started giving us your reasons, and you went through a lot of constitutional amendments from the 13th, 14th, and 15th. You talked about a number of cases when you were going through their examples, I mean, of the January 6th riots, Black Lives Matter, et cetera, and you covered a large array of events. I think you were able in the question and answer to describe how you apply this stuff that you've learned, that that assembly is a distinct right separate and apart from speech, and that they do work together. I think your response was it's louder if you were together. So assembly does make a difference. You were able to respond appropriately when we were talking about examples of limitations. You came up with the timely example of COVID to protect us. So, you know, it's not always about protecting others, but it's to protect us as well. And bringing in the assembly for religious purposes. That's been a hot topic as well. I really appreciated your comments. Thank you so much.
So I too thank you for your presentation. I want to talk to you about a couple of things. And when the example of coronavirus was cited, one of the things I thought were the places I thought you were going with, you know, there were a whole bunch of people who announced that the government had this all wrong and that they should be able to get together. And I don't know if you recall, there were a bunch of people who showed up with their guns at the State House in Michigan. And there were people who gathered in Oregon. And there were people who basically wanted to say, you all can't tell me how to run my life. You're taking away my freedom. And because I own a Harley, I happened to have been really sensitive to the people who gathered in Sturgis for the Harley rally. And a whole bunch of people said, pandemic all you want to, I'm riding my motorcycle and a few thousand of us are gonna gather and we're not wearing masks, by the way. I really appreciated the fact that you mentioned church attendance, because that was one of the more difficult calls. You know, we're a country that really, you know, we may talk about freedom of religion all we want to, but we really are a religion-based country. And so that caused some really strong pulls on people. Do I follow these government guidelines on health? Do I miss my call to go to church? That was one of the more interesting ones. Your citations of the civil rights amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th, as well as the 1866 Civil Rights Act, were kind of examples of law. Not quite sure how they had to do with assembly, but you did get the right ideas in there for me. You touched on a bunch of stuff that I enjoyed. I appreciate it, and thank you very much. Good luck to you.
Thank you. And just to add a couple of things that my colleagues haven't mentioned, I appreciated your William Penn references, and it's always nice to learn things that you didn't know before, says me. I also really appreciated your Asian hate crimes, and it's true that what is right close to us matters a whole lot more, doesn't it? Thank you so much for a really excellent presentation. It was a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope you have had a good time with this experience, and I look forward to seeing you down the road. I expect you'll be doing this down the road in some fashion or another. I hope you're hooked. Take care. I'm glad you had a good time. We did.
Thanks,
Thank you
team.
so much.
And thanks, Ms. Nolan, for all your hard work.